So the idea of the post-digital world is that a lot of businesses are thinking about things in terms of like, do we have our social media in line? Do we have a website? Do we have mobile friendly? Are we doing all these things? And the idea is that these are sort of done, it's over. The post-digital world is a true convergence, and it's not a convergence of is TV like the internet, it's more convergence of is digital now fully integrated into our physical worlds. And so you could sort of blaze off into the future and look at things like 3D printing and drone delivery and all that sort of stuff and virtual reality. But those really are indicators of what we're seeing in terms of the physicality and the digitalness of the world coming together as one like never before. And so when you're looking at this from pure business transformation or as a company, you really are trying to figure out what are the business models that we will need to be sustainable in a very, very different. There are a lot of dramatic changes, but I think they're primarily summed up by the fact that the consumer really has changed. For many years, I was someone who was banging this drum that the consumer has changed because of the internet. The consumer changed because of e-commerce, because of social media. And if I were to be honest and reflect back, they didn't change that much. They were still doing what consumers do, seeing, noticing things, sharing things, and then buying them. What we're seeing now is a different type of consumer, a consumer that is getting either free or paid access to things like Netflix and Spotify. They're actually paying for access because they don't want ownership. We see them doing things like moving into tiny houses or taking a zip car instead of owning a car. So we're seeing things like renting at a much dramatic scale than ownership. We're seeing them sell the things that they actually own when they're not using them. So we're seeing things like Airbnb and other platforms like that. This is creating a really different type of consumer, and it's really important for businesses to start understanding why they're doing this, what they're doing, and how this impacts the business world. Because if they're actually getting this efficient, if they're actually sharing, if they're actually able to rent these things, if they're actually able to have this amazing access, what does it mean for your future business and your future business models? Yeah, it's not like there's a moment in time where things became post-digital and there are companies that are adapting and companies that aren't adapting. Clearly the companies that we would point to are ones that were sort of either developed or nurtured within it. So you could always look at companies like Amazon. You could always look at companies like Apple. And those are companies that I always look at sort of hesitantly because I really believe we could never be those companies. I think they are, to a certain degree, exceptions and not rules. But there are companies who definitely think in that sort of duality of physical and digital. You could look at newer companies like GoPro would be an example of that. You could even look at a company like Red Bull in terms of how they run this sort of media operations of what they do. And then you're seeing more traditional infrastructures take place where you're seeing big hotel chains acquire companies that are sort of being disruptive to their space or their environment. So there are many examples of it. It's still very, very nascent. It's more of a reality or of acceptance of how the consumer has changed and what you're going to do about it. If I were trapped alone on a desert island, I would say, who's next by The Who? It's The Who. Do you need a reason? It's The Who.